And we are recording.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 4th Digital Transformation in Government Conference. Delighted to have you here. My name is Bob Wiseman, the host for the conference. Currently, we're very fortunate to have Yvonne Gallagher from the National Audit Office in the United Kingdom to be speaking. Yvonne's going to be talking about evaluating the UK Parliament's digital transformation, delivery of value for money, which is near and dear to many of our hearts, especially here in the nation's capital, in Canada's capital. Yvonne has over 25 years of experience in IT, business change, digital services, and cyber and information assurance. She's had senior roles in the private sector in large organizations such as Prudential and Network Rail. Yvonne was CIO in 2 different government departments, as well as the Chief Digital Officer and CIO in the private sector prior to move to the National Audit Office. Yvonne is also a fellow with the British Computer Society and previous chair of the Organization and Employers Board. Yvonne's role in the National Audit Office over the past 7 years is to support the NAO's work for Parliament, evaluating how well digital and associated business change programs are implemented to deliver value for money. So without further ado, Yvonne, over to you. We are absolutely delighted to have you speak.
Thank you very much, Bob. And good morning, everybody. Although it is afternoon here in the UK, I'm glad it's not the other way around. Otherwise, I would have been up very early. In addition to what Bob has just said, one of the things that I've been doing now at the National Audit Office since my time here is really having a look across all government departments and what they're doing at the centre. So I have a small team of specialists, same kind of background as me, and we have done a lot of work both with departments, mostly trying to engage at senior leader level. So one of the things about the NAO is that we do a lot of reports on government, mostly focused on, not mostly, but a lot of them focused on failed programs. And what we're trying to do in the work that we're doing here on digital, it's a new-ish area, digital modernization of government here. So we try to be, as part of our work, be as insightful, but also as influential as we've been able to. So just to remind you of the NAO, it's we're independent, but we have statutory access to all government data. So we're the only ones in the UK that if we go to look at anything in any departments, they have to provide us with the data. So it just means our reports are all very well looked at, very well used by other research bodies, because we have a lot of data and evidence, which is obviously, before we produce our reports, it's been agreed by departments. So just to recap then on what we've been doing, 2 years ago, we produced a report on the challenges of implementing digital change and transformation. So we know that a lot of the reports that we've produced over the past probably 7 to 10 years since government have started to be very keen on digital transformation and modernization, what has happened is we have reported on those failures, but this time round we wanted to get behind why. What are the reasons why government keeps failing on its major large-scale changes? So we looked at the strategies that government have produced, and to be quite honest, all really good strategies over the last 25 years. So clearly governments recognised a long time ago its need to transform, keep up to date, but the implementation of these strategies they're really hard, and clearly some progress has been made, but not the pace really is slow. One of the things that we know in government, and it's interesting to know if it's the same in Canada, but the government has historically really focused on major infrastructure programs, building roads, bridges, etc., which costs billions of pounds. So from the Treasury and our central commercial functions. The guidelines are very much focused on how to write business cases for these with the time cost benefits, an important element to pull out. But with all infrastructure projects, the end result is concrete, so it can be visualized from the outset. So in other words, if you're going to build a bridge, even if it takes much, much longer than you thought, eventually a bridge will be built. But with a lot of digital programs that we have reported on, programs that have gone on for 7 or 10 years, and still at the end of that time, nothing's to show for it. So really, in the infrastructure program, the focus is on risks, which are generally known risks that come up over and over again. So on the left-hand side, this is what we try to really bring out much more of the differences here. So digital, about services, people, systems, processes, and data. It's just not about technology. And it's more than just, if we're reporting on them, did the business case stack up and did it work? So and as I said, the end result is often it's not tangible, you can't see anything. So how you do digital transformation involves data, and that is the big thing. And that's therefore things like the architecture and attention to detail, which is where digital programs run into problems, is one of the key issues. So on digital, we've talked about the focus really is on complexity and integration. So, and those two things mean that there's lots of risks. Many of them can be unknown risks or haven't been risks. They're very specific to the environment. So different completely to the types of risks you'll see on infrastructure. But we're now seeing infrastructure programs which have started to involve technology. And this has added complexity to those because it requires integration. Now, the example I've given here is a program we have called Crossrail, which is about building a new cross railway in the UK from London to the south coast. But that required lots of new digital signalling. And whilst the physical elements of the project were delivered safely, they had huge holdups because the issues around integration of the old technology and the new digital technology or the new signalling was not well understood. So in our report, as I said, we wanted to look at the why. And one of the things that we're often asked to do at the NAO is evaluate things against good practice. But to be quite honest, government has the good practice. There's loads of good practice. There's no point in us producing good practice. The issue is much more around why can't departments actually follow good practice, and why is it so difficult to land these changes? And really, we have pinned pretty much all the problems down at the early stages. So this is about having unrealistic aims and ambitions. So not just very ambitious programs, but quite often unrealistic ambition, but the lack of realism isn't recognized. Too much uncertainty as well as risk. And government there's a lot of programs now that rush to engage with commercial partners and put in contracts before they really have bottomed out what these programs are all about. And then that can result in programs that as the months go by, all of the real complexity and issues kind of creep out. And then the suppliers and the project teams are stuck with a very rigid contract. And therefore, all the focus then becomes on much more of an adversarial relationship between the supplier and the departments. So, but the big thing is that if it's about transformation, it's about recognizing and dealing with what is there already around the legacy systems and the data. And there's a lot of talk about, new startups these days, Amazon, etc. But the issue is, as far as digital is concerned, startups really are pretty straightforward because you just start with fresh data. But transforming what's already there, things that have been there, the people, process, systems, and the data for years, transforming that is really difficult. And we don't see that factored in sufficiently to the timescales and the plans for what some of these big programs are trying to do. But the other thing that has to be there is the right capability. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit further on, but the capability to really understand the three issues above and avoid them is often missing from the leadership, the non-technical people. Our second point is on this bottom section is about agile. So agile, I don't know about in Canada, agile in the UK, private sector government has become so prevalent. But the fact is that, of course, agile, if you're going to build a front end screen, a user interface, instead of writing down the requirements for what you want to see on a screen, you would just sit down with somebody and talk it through and build it in an agile way. But with major, large scale business transformation, legacy transformation, thinking that you can just start off with barely any real planning and assessment and analysis and just kick things off and say, I'm going to develop it in an iterative way is too simplistic. So, and then we have now, it's quite interesting, we have a lot of ongoing debate about how you fund capital spend for digital programs and business as usual versus the RDEL. So this is the ongoing requirements to maintain the systems that you've got. And this is an area that cloud, the cloud issue, which is now used to be if you had servers, you would have that here. We would have that as capital spend. Now, going forward, cloud is being paid for out of the resource budget. So that's become quite a funding issue. So we produced that last report, and our Public Accounts Committee were very keen on this, and we produced a lot of recommendations. And from this report, what we said was these fundamental things have to be addressed before government departments keep embarking on projects and major programs without addressing some of the barriers and constraints. So the government set up a new centre called it's called CDDO, the Chief Digital and Data Office, and they now are tasked with trying to do digital transformation in government. And before, we had something called GDS, the Government Digital Service, and they were much more focused on our website for government and front end things, much more of the visual. But now CDDO have been tasked with really trying to drive through proper transformation. So we, on the basis of that, with the new work that they've undertaken, we thought this would be a very early look at what they're attempting to do and how they're going about it. So our new report was just out a couple of weeks ago, and this is about addressing the barriers to efficiency. And so the barriers then, the fact that government's operating models and its services need modernising. Departments have put lots of front-end improvements, but they are layered onto all the existing legacy environments, so they make it more complicated and in some instances more expensive. And also it's this aim about, all governments love to be, they want to be well-beating, they want to be the best at things. And really your starting point has to be taken into account. But we said underlying all of this is understanding the data that already exists. What's the government data? What state is it in? How good is it? And what do you need to do with your data to move forward? So our report then on addressing the barriers, we looked at how the central government department was going about it. And we were very pleased that they had taken on our recommendations and they were trying to address the barriers. This has actually never happened before. Most digital strategies have been all about forward, I'm not going to call it is forward thinking, but it's forward rhetoric rather than, and never really got into, so how are we going to do that? And this time government is focused on, we need to address these things, these hurdles, and then we can move forward. So we wanted to give this report a bit of a harder edge. So, and I'm sure it applies to all government, it's all about how can government be more efficient and how can we reduce our operating costs? So central government here, departments spend over 400 billion annually on the day-to-day running. So really lots of opportunities for efficiency there. And we wanted to get into a bit more detail of what they need to do. So we then focused on how does the Central Digital and Data Office, what's its approach to transforming government? It was really quite interesting. They were quite clever here. This time they didn't call it a strategy, they called it a roadmap. And this is in recognition, they were putting in place what the milestones and the issues and what needs to be done, or they called it missions. But they were very clear, it's not their job to deliver it, it's the department's job to deliver it. And obviously with that relationship, how do you get from the center, how do you get departments to support and do what they need to do on this roadmap? But the other thing we wanted to focus on, whether the senior business leaders across government have a suitable level of digital capability. So this time round, our key findings were, first of all, the legacy. So there's lots of legacy systems in government and understanding. So we know reforming legacy systems is hard. We've talked to the private sector about this. So big private sector companies who, especially financial services, who started off their systems around the same time as government 30 or 40 years ago. They understand in these big private sector companies, their legacy systems and the data in the legacy are problems for them. They're risky to change, they're complex. You change one little thing and it can affect 50 other areas that that one little thing is linked to. And they are very nervous about doing anything about legacy. So we're not just advocating large scale swapping out legacy. What we're saying is it needs to be tackled. And in the private sector, for a lot of those, they've recognized their legacy issue and they spent a lot of money investing in legacy and making specific decisions to keep them going as best they can, and then work out the consequences of that, or whether they've got a longer term legacy replacement plan. So, but in government, a lot of the senior decision makers, and I'm talking about generalist decision makers, don't recognize that problem even in the same way. So this is why, going back to our previous report, with those programs are one of the reasons they're unrealistically ambitious, is because they don't understand that what they're planning to do or what they want to do is do something about these entrenched legacy that are attached to so many other entrenched legacies. So what we're saying here, those responsible for these programs, senior generalist leaders, must understand that complexity. But the really important thing, and I think, talking about systems and technology is a bit of a red herring. The issue really, they're just vehicles for the data, and it's legacy data that's causing the problem. And the way it was captured and stored years ago, not necessarily kept up to date, and very inconsistently. So you can even get one department, if it's got lots of different kinds of services, those citizens' information is it's captured and stored and dealt with in different ways. So one of the things then that CDDO are also trying to do is looking now at trying to get at the full end-to-end costs. So this is back to the point of government done some good jobs as far as the citizen is concerned for putting front ends onto their existing services. So for instance, really easy now for straightforward applications for driving license or new passports in the country. But behind the scenes, anything that's not straightforward still requires a lot of people and processes. So CDDO have got in their roadmap, they have a focus on how this needs to change and how they bring departments on board supporting this. So the big area then is with the leadership skills and capacity. And this is the thing about these non-specialist government leaders. So one of the things, I think, as Bob said, I spent, my first 20 years in the private sector. And one of the things that amazed me when I came into government is the equivalent in government of MDs that I would see in the private sector have about double the size of their portfolios. Really, the breadth and the what they have to do to keep business as usual show on the road for in all government departments, it's a big ask. And at the same time now, they are expected to be able to understand how to modernize and transform the way their department works for their services and operations. So really, that's a problem. And most of the in government, certainly in the UK, we've always, our fast tracks, those that have done very well in government, have often come in on the policy side. So the thinkers, the strategies, the policy people, and really to be able to do modernization of services and operations, you need to understand operations. And then certainly you need to understand how technology, old technology, new technology, how it makes it all work. And so you don't need to understand the technology, you need to understand the business and the way it operates using technology. So one of the things we actually said it in our last report, with a lot of the programs we have, they're business change programs, the decisions are made by very senior business people. And so actually they don't even realize it, but they are the de facto digital leaders without the skills to make those big decisions. And in a lot of cases, they'd be horrified to be called digital leaders. It's not something they would consider themselves or even want to be, but we would like them to be that because that's what it needs to make a difference. And of course, we've got the digital skills shortage. It's a global shortage. I'm sure you have the same issue in Canada, and clearly what the market is now paying for these skills and what government can pay, there's quite a big gap. So that's an issue, major issue that still is not being resolved. But the other thing now focused on what this centre is, what the CDDO is trying to do, is look at the other central functions, which is the commercial area, treasury, procurement, and I was thinking more about policy. Those people do not have they are like the senior non-specialists. They don't have digital knowledge and operational knowledge and understanding. So their guidelines that they provide for mostly, infrastructure based for departments, aren't specific enough for digital. And one of the things in this roadmap is that government are trying to address those things as well. So they're the kinds of things that we're talking about. The funding issue around short-termism, this bias for capital over revenue, and the business cases with false certainties locked in too early. Commercial is, there's always the argument about being bureaucratic and risk averse. But the thing here is with the point on digital needs to be more flexible and focus on getting really down to the detail of what's required, rather than at the end of the day, we want this to happen. That's not enough when you're putting a digital contract in place. So policy has always been an issue. Policy was even an issue in the private sector, which is really trying to get policy people engaged in understanding the consequences of implementing their policy. So, and how do you iterate that process between policy and delivery people? And then all the issues around delivery. Of course, we have in government, the model is the centre tries to have guidelines and help departments, but the departments have their own structures as to how they want to run their services and their operations. So I think quite a lot of things there to look at the broader ecosystem that can be tightened up to help digital programs. So we recently had our public accounts hearing. So our reports all go to one of the government committees. And here's a quote here from Alex Chisholm, who's the chief executive. He's the government chief executive and of the civil service. And he said they are finding our digital reports that we're producing much more very helpful, because what we're trying to do is bring more insight rather than merely commenting on the problems. And he has now said on a couple of occasions how useful he has found that. So finally then, our overall messages are the point here is that government's new function and its new department that it's set up called CGDO, really interesting and a very interesting model, I think, for a central function trying to do something quite long-term, not looking for the quick wins the whole time, but really trying to address the problem and try to assist in really getting to grips with how to support and expedite government digital transformation. So what we saw, because it was early days, their foundations are very good, but obviously, as we know, when these kinds of programs continue, there's going to be lots of challenges in the future, so it needs to be sustained. I think our other message is about this digital expertise and capacity building, both from the centre of, both at the centre and for business leaders in departments. So we must have now business leaders that are digitally aware. So I'm going to say what I said previously. This is not about technology. I think a few years ago when we had GDS, to try and kind of get digital awareness, they devised some new programs to teach people how to code. It's not about that. It's really about how do you run a modern business, which is, after all, a digital business. And what do business leaders need to know to be able to do that in 2023? And I think even more so now, we, of course, as part of our remit, we also look at the impact of new technology. And I think now we've got AI coming in and the pace of change is huge. that is not going to go away. So this reason to start understanding how things work, I'm not going to say digital, but how things work is really important. So our other messages really were to departments is to now get under the skin of the cost of operations, to be able to prioritize when there's the inevitable efficiency cuts that come up time and again, and how to change those processes at the center. So what we're saying is all of those things really important to address the systemic issues, but a really good start's been made here by CDDO. Okay, we'll stop there. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Yvonne. That was a great presentation. And many of the problems that you have are mirrored here in Ottawa and elsewhere around the globe, in the United States especially. Now, I've got some questions, and please, if anybody attendees, please put them in the Q&A box, and I'll get to them forthright in a moment. So, regarding the risk aspects of transformation programs and managing complexity, what internal tools, excuse me, have aided you in gaining insights that were not visible to the departments undertaking those programs?
That's a really interesting question, because partly with the work we've undertaken over the years, one of the things that we did, this was about 5 years ago, we actually did some reviews of the major departments on their data. And we did this as an exercise, an internal exercise to help them. And as part of that, we looked at, we created a data framework ourselves, and then we evaluated the data against this data framework. And then we asked them to evaluate their data against the data framework. And it's quite interesting how we asked the data experts in their organization to do this evaluation, and they were very close. As you can imagine, the scores were quite low. And that was a really good tool or outcome as well, or output for us to take to the senior leaders, which says data is really a big problem here. So, and we've cited a lot of those data findings. We did a data report a couple of years ago to say, here's the government are really keen on joining up data. So we get new ministers in, new leaders, and they all say the same thing. Wouldn't it be fantastic for citizens if we could join up their data across services, you know, health, benefits, tax, or whatever? Well, of course it would, but it's a really difficult thing to do. And that's what we said in our data report. Aspirations are great, but you really need to, they can't be easily achieved until you do something about your data. So our data report was really hard hitting, which said, these things are not going to go away. And for you to harness any, you know, data analytics are not solving the problem. And we even cited in our report a couple of years ago, you know, AI is coming in. So what does, with a lot of government data, especially around personal data, what do you get? You get to the wrong answer faster than you did before. So, so lots of things about data. And then we also produced a framework for, we called it our framework for evaluating services. So have you got a strategy? Does it match the business strategy? And we looked at the 7 areas, you know, data, technology, etc. But actually, we found that was too sophisticated, because mostly the answers to a lot of those things were in terms of good practice, and especially with the advent of Agile, it was all, no, we don't have any of those things. So after our challenges report, where we identified those 6 areas, we've now produced something much shorter, which says, here's 6 areas, and we've made it a 2-pager with what you want to look at. But we've also then, what we've tried to do is help. So the other areas that can help in this are risk and audit committees. So we've written some in layman's term, some guides for our risk and audit committees short 4 pages that says, here's what you need to understand now about cloud. Here's what you need to understand about cyber, just in terms of how you need to what the questions you need to ask your departmental senior people when you come and say, we want more investment, or we're thinking about doing this on cloud or cyber or whatever. So we know they're never going to be experts in that. So here's just some key things you need to know, and here's some key questions to ask, and really that will get at the fundamentals. And we've done something similar on a data guide and agile. So it's all, if someone comes, you know, to the Risk and Audit Committee and says, well, here's a really complicated program, and we originally planned it and it was going to take 10 years, but we've done really well, and we're only going to do it, we can do it in 3 because we're going to do it in an agile way. So really what we've said is, if you hear this, here's what you need to question. So we've looked at a number of things really to be able to make these assessments. And that's provided us with a lot then of insights that we can share with others around government that can help to move some of this forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Yvonne. 20 years ago, I was working with the British delegates, and anyways, make short story long, one of them was heading off to become head of the United Kingdom Central Data Management Agency. That was in the late 1990s. Does that organization still exist under a different guise? Unfortunately,
it doesn't. So, and that was, so a lot of things, is interestingly, got lost in the UK a few years ago. I think when GDS came in, it was much more about, you know, the messages were a lot more about services can be spun up quickly. And I think you know, in when they look back, they actually said, after a few years, we've realized, you know, government's all about its legacy. So, and it's really understanding the difference. If you're not a technologist, if you're a generalist, it's the difference between startups and transforming what is there. And that's the, you know, that is just so huge. But I think generalist mentality lie in the area of, this is a startup. And obviously with a startup, you would always start with today's data. You wouldn't be lugging out old stuff on people that is held in different ways in different places and with different names all over the place. So the data, as I'm going to go back to my data point, it's all about the data.
Yes, I would fully agree with that. And problem is, a lot of the methodologies are process-centric, not data-centric.
Exactly.
And processes are extremely brittle. Do you have any insights into what has changed, and why are they now open to moving away from the quick wins? It's a major challenge for people working in, for example, the government of Canada when they're doing oversight.
So are you saying government, Canada is moving away from quick wins, or it isn't?
No, we're alluding to the fact that you've gotten people to move away from the quick win scenario. What has changed? It's still a major challenge.
Okay, well, interestingly, so when we did our challenges report 2 years ago, we first started saying that, you know, front ends are the, you know, the colloquial, the lipstick on a pig. So the pig is the legacy system, the legacy data. And we further focused on that to say that all the cost and the inefficiency is baked in. So it's a bit like you've got a big lump of the way things are. And all the time, any quick win, so if something costs 50 million, a quick win is probably going to add another 2 million on top. And it's going to increase the complexity because you try to link it to all the things there. So, and when we said that in our first report, then we really wanted to labour this point, because quite often when we first started doing the report, even internally, the challenge we got back is, you know, we try to have balanced reports, which says this is good and this isn't so good, you know, rather than, but our report said everything was bad. And our response to that challenge was, we are trying to say, we're talking about large scale digital change. So sure, government can do, we're not saying they can't do, of course they can do lots of small things, and they do small enhancements, small improvements, but that is completely different to here's something here. And if you can't keep tweaking this in another 20 years, you'll have this baked in pudding with stuff on top that'll just, it just gets bigger and bigger. And that has to change. So otherwise things are just getting more complicated and more costly, and you just can't take the costs out. So that was our report 2 years ago. And it was really interesting that our chief executive said at this meeting, and we've got something which quotes him now, which says, departments put in front ends which look good, but they aren't good. So really this shift has been a lot of, and we've been doing a lot of conference speaking to government departments on the back of our reports. And it's, this message is, I'm not saying we're the only one delivering the message, but it's being listened to, I think, is the point. So really our next thing that we're thinking about doing is some kind of paper on, we've called it, with around technical debt. Now we don't want to use that term, but people, but in government and risk and audit committees and finance people in department understand technical, they understand financial debt. So we think if we can relate it to technical debt, which is you've just got this thing sitting here and you're just increasing it on, you know, on an ongoing basis. So it's a long game, but it's interesting how we're starting to make some difference there.
Okay, last question. Anyways, like I said, very complimentary. The presentation is very insightful. One of the things is what sorts of strategies can be applied to make leadership and resourcing to tackle legacy, sort of a long-term approach, especially in the light of executive churn, i.e. people moving around in positions on an incredibly rapid rate, and you sort of lose that continuity.
Well, one of the things that the CD, the data, in this roadmap now, what they are saying to all departments is you have to identify your top 50 legacy and those that are the most risky and citizen, or how important and risky they are. And so we didn't even have that identification before. And then they are going to use that in a sustained effort to support those departments in getting funding to do something about them. But the capability building, so we've talked about, it's not just digital training. So one of the things that we said at our last committee, one of the MPs at the committee then said, he suddenly whipped out this letter and said he's got a permanent secretary appointment letter here, second perm secretary appointment, senior appointment, and it talks about it needs all these financial skills, but it doesn't say he needs digital skills. So he said to the chief exec, civil service chief exec, are you going to, is this something that we're going to start looking for? Will we appoint permanent secretaries? And the answer was kind of yes. So there's all, you know, so this is objectives, levers, capability building, training, all of that. And then in this roadmap, 6 permanent secretaries sponsored each of these 6. And we spoke to all of them, and really they themselves have now recognized how much they know about this whole digital transformation agenda that they didn't realize before, and they can see the value that that is having to them. So I think the answer to that question is lots of small things will start to add up to some significant change, all very positive really from that point of view.
Well, no, that's very insightful. When I came to Ottawa to help set up the CIOs in the 1990s, we were basically frozen in place for 5 years. It was said you will have the continuity, but the trouble is right now is that there were career implications, which are significant. And anyways, whatever, that's just life. The presentation was very insightful. I'm sorry, we have more questions. We just don't have time. So thank you very much for taking the time to present. It's a subject very near and dear to many of our hearts. And anyways, it was super. And now
Great.
I'm going to end the recording. Before I say the recording, please, we've got the Dr. Raul Abril from the European Commission is going to be talking about the Interoperable Europe Act. And I think it'll be very insightful as to his observations, making sort of digitization work in the LooseNet Federation and sharing information and data. So without further ado, I'm going to end the recording and see you in the next session.